going to put in a photograph, and this time I'm going to upload a photograph again. Now that particular photograph, I didn't like the way that it came out, so I'm just going to shrink it down. And frame it up a little bit better. Now, if I click on that, I can also add some more text on top of the frame, but I'm going to record this right now. This is me and my youngest daughter practicing skiing in our backyard. Now, one of the things I want to point out about Adobe Spark that's really great is if I decide I need to put this frame ahead of this one, I can do so by just clicking and dragging. The audio will still stay the same, and now I can go here and say, we're learning to
With the recent E3 worldwide reveal of Cyberpunk 2077, physical nature. Cyberpunk is a genre based on unruly kids using technology for the purpose of anarchy. This sparked a lot of interest, but it wasn't until 1982 that the genre became world-renowned, but could be their own entity. And yes, there is an augmented samurai, and yes, extremely core topics. Ghost in the Shell follows Public Security Section 9, a task they were basically just machine of Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk today is occasionally explored, but is often seen as a difficult genre to navigate due to its unique collection of influences and cultural focuses. A modern-day example of Cyberpunk is the game franchise Deus Ex. Looking at the most recent titles, Human Revolution and after a terrorist incident, in branding augmentation, the underworld has thrived. From books to animations to games, it's been demonstrated as a thrilling genre for really anyone to explore. Actually, well, maybe not kids, but almost everyone. If you're interested in learning more about Cyberpunk and experience its deep history for yourself, I highly recommend the above works, or even surfing the web, as there are plenty of fast
everywhere, and the thing that has not changed is the music. Inspired from the 80s, created in an era where cyberpunk created its own version of it. As people start having altered carbon, cyberpunk will only become faster at creating them.
And does it still make sense to use that as carbon? There is an AI character who takes the form of Edgar Allan Poe, a nod to the fact that Poe is credited with inventing the detective genre with his time period in which it was. But unlike them, he's a criminal and doesn't have a sense of civilization, targeting their advertising. Today, we're still terrified about the growing prominence of advertising declining for years. A cyberpunk world is, almost by definition, a world that is a version of Vegas is inspired by story, at least not yet. It's genuinely revolutionary. With equal to Blade Runner than the... In 1982, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner changed science fiction, launching the cyberpunk genre with a mesmerizing vision of a future run down by technology. Except this footage isn't from Blade Runner. It's from the new Netflix series Altered Carbon, which looks more like a sequel to Blade Runner than the actual sequel to Blade Runner does. But I don't want to pick on Altered Carbon too much. It's far from the only story that has yet to escape the influence of Blade Runner, as a recent article in The Guardian pointed out, and which I'll hopefully expand upon here. Flying cars, giant ads on giant skyscrapers, massive income inequality, it's all here. What I want to do is ask why cyberpunk has fixated so heavily on this aesthetic, and does it still make sense to use that aesthetic 40 years after it was initially created? And to do all that, I've got to talk about how cyberpunk came into being. There are two seminal works of cyberpunk that are credited with kicking off the genre, the aforementioned Blade Runner in 1982, and 2 years later, William Gibson's novel, Neuromancer. In an interview with Paris Review, William Gibson related how he had once ran into Ridley Scott, and the two talked about the ingredients they had used to form their respective works, and realized that they had basically been working from the same recipe. That included French comic books, which in the 1970s were publishing some of the most provocative science fiction images anywhere. And one glance at them is enough to see the influence on Blade Runner's Los Angeles or on Gibson's urban sprawl. Both works also owe a lot to Japanese urban planning, since every cyberpunk city sort of looks like downtown Tokyo. But to understand one of the most important influences on these worlds, we're going to need a primer on the history of the detective genre. In Altered Carbon, there is an AI character who takes the form of Edgar Allan Poe, a nod to the fact that Poe is credited with inventing the detective genre with his 1814 story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. The story includes a brilliant detective, a narrator who is the detective's friend, an incompetent police force, and a scene where the detective reveals the solution to the mystery through the application of logic. If you're thinking, that sounds a lot like Sherlock Holmes, well, you're right. It is the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. But in the 1920s, when American writers like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett started writing detective stories, they changed a lot of the core tropes of the genre. And in the process, they created the hard-boiled detective. Hard-boiled detective fiction relocated the genre to the mean streets of crime-infested cities. Instead of a gentleman detective with a mostly academic interest in the mystery, we got rough-around-the-edges anti-heroes who worked mostly for money but still had an inner sense of nobility. It's a type of fiction that is inextricably linked to the time period in which it was created, reflecting back at its audience the pains of the Prohibition and the Depression. Now, I've been playing clips here from film noir movies from the 40s and 50s, and that's because many of the biggest hard-boiled hits were adapted into the most important films of film noir, movies like The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon. But it's important to bring up film noir here because of the way it depicted cities. They are dark and mysterious places which feel gritty and dangerous, and where the weather is never good, all critical to the aesthetics of Blade Runner. The main character, Deckard, is a hard-boiled detective through and through, just like Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe. And Takeshi, the protagonist of Altered Carbon, hits every beat of this archetype as well. The protagonist of William Gibson's Neuromancer, a hacker named Case, is a bit different. The influence of Raymond Chandler is still there. The novel even ends on practically the same line as The Big Sleep. Like hard-boiled characters, Case is an outsider who is selfish and works for money. But unlike them, he's a criminal and doesn't have that inner sense of justice. So instead, he becomes the prototype of a character common in a lot of cyberpunk, the rebellious hacker who uses their ability to rage against the machine. But just like the Prohibition and the Depression loomed large over hard-boiled detective fiction, the 80s loom large over Neuromancer and Blade Runner. So what was happening in the 80s again?
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Oh yeah, I think it's hard to overstate the fact that cyberpunk is a product of Ronald Reagan's America. Or at least the fear of what Ronald Reagan's America could produce. Or at least American cyberpunk fiction is. Japanese cyberpunk has a different cultural context, even if it often arrives at a similar aesthetic. But in America, the common thread that runs through cyberpunk is the anxiety over the effects of unrestrained capitalism and how technology can make all of those effects even worse. It's about how these great forces could erode our sense of civilization, the individual, the body, and the mind. The standard cyberpunk cityscape is a fitting representation of all of this, as the lines between everything are blurred. Nothing stands out from the whole, mirroring the protagonist's struggles to maintain a sense of independence against forces greater than themselves. Today, that anxiety isn't even really theoretical anymore, but it is different than what it was in the 1980s. Here's an example. Advertisements are absolutely pervasive in cyberpunk worlds. Like giant holographic advertisements that take up the whole sides of buildings, like this one in Blade Runner. Capitalism is literally wrapping itself around the city. It is the city. And it made sense in 1980. Almost immediately, Reagan was cutting taxes and slashing regulations, basically taking the reins off of capitalism. Reagan also peeled back the laws stopping companies from targeting their advertising to children, which led to all of this. Each sold separately. Thanks, Reagan. But there's a bit of a contradiction implicit to the use of advertising as the aesthetic of choice in cyberpunk today. Because the presence of advertising is supposed to feel oppressive, soul-crushing. But for us, having lived with cyberpunk for nearly 40 years, they're part of the appeal. They're what give the city its alluring neon glow. This shot in Altered Carbon isn't about the horror of advertising dominating the skyline, but about how cool the city looks. Placed at the end of the first episode as it is, the shot is a promise to the viewer. It's a hook, inviting us to explore the city in the rest of the series. Of course, today we're still terrified about the growing prominence of advertising, but if the worst types of ads were the neon signs on buildings, we consider it a blessing at this point. The ads we really fear today are the inescapable ones which track our behavior and collect data about us, or fake news spread on social media that is used for political purposes. And I'd love to see cyberpunk explore that side of capitalism. Another example of how things have changed? Here's a graph of the murder rate in America from 1950 until today. You'll notice that it spikes at 1980, so it made sense that the writers of that time would be concerned about the rising crime rate and create worlds where crime was everywhere. It doesn't make quite as much sense today, where violent crime has been declining for years. A cyberpunk world is, almost by definition, a world that is on the brink of collapse, but it doesn't have to be on the brink of collapse because of crime. It can be because of climate change, mass migration, terrorism, nationalism, fascism. For writers, there's really an embarrassment of riches out there when it comes to, potentially world-ending crises that are happening right now. Yeah. And in fairness, there are pieces of fiction out there that are tackling these topics, but all of these things are the reasons a show like Altered Carbon feels outdated to me. In its defense, it has an intriguing sci-fi premise which it uses as an income inequality allegory, but the show is suffocated by an over-reliance on cyberpunk tropes that are rooted in a time that is no longer our own. This is why Blade Runner 2049 feels fresher on this point. Even though it's sort of obligated to recreate the dystopian version of Los Angeles from the original movie, the other settings in the film feel inspired by our present. The Dust Bowl version of Vegas is inspired by Sydney, Australia during a sandstorm. Another part of the story takes place in a junkyard, and both feel like they exist because of present-day concerns about climate change. Topicality is also one of the reasons I think Mr. Robot is so brilliant. Oh, yeah, Mr. Robot, it's Cyberpunk 2. But how can it be cyberpunk? There aren't even punks with leather jackets and purple hair in it. And I guess that's really what I've been trying to say here. Genre isn't just about appearances, it's about the substance of the story and what drives the conflict. While it doesn't look like cyberpunk, you've still got the giant multinational corporation as the main enemy, a group of hackers rebelling against the established order, and themes of isolation and mental health. Like so much of cyberpunk, the story focuses on how technology is pushing us apart. And while there isn't any science fictional technology in the story, at least not yet, it does explore the trope of mind invasion that occupies so much of cyberpunk fiction. Much of the show is about Elliot's battles to gain control over his own mind. And of course, as a hacker, Elliot Alderson is another descendant of Case from Neuromancer. But while cyberpunk traditionally takes place at some time in the future, Mr. Robot takes place in our present. Instead of cribbing from the visual language of film noir, it's developed its own style of cinematography to emphasize the isolation the characters feel, often tucking characters into the corners of the frame. And I think the show may even surpass the goals of the cyberpunk that has come before it. Mr. Robot is genuinely revolutionary, with its characters focused on actually changing the established capitalist order. Most cyberpunk operates as a critique of certain power structures, but they rarely offer a solution. Case in Neuromancer, for instance, never challenges the system that is controlling him. So Mr. Robot is revolutionizing both the arena that cyberpunk can take place in and taking many of the genre's core ideas further than they've ever been taken before. Towards the end of the most recent season, the world has started to look a lot more like a traditional cyberpunk universe, with all of its political posters everywhere and government forces driving through the streets. It's almost like a cyberpunk origin story. And so by setting the story in the present, Mr. Robot's mere existence is chilling, as it suggests that the dystopian world we fear may already be right around the corner. Cyberpunk is a truly global genre. It has global concerns and global influences, ranging from American hard-boiled detective fiction to French adult comic books to Japanese, well, everything. The possibilities for fresh takes on the genre are endless, so long as new writers are willing to shake up the ingredients they use to construct their fictional settings. Cyberpunk is always warning us about the negative side effects of technology, but one of the things the internet is pretty great at is helping you learn new skills. And one of the best places to do that is Skillshare. Skillshare has over 20,000 classes in writing, motion graphics, video editing, and a whole bunch of other stuff that helps me make these videos. So if you're interested in making videos but haven't edited anything before, check out Benjamin Halsall's crash course on how to edit using Final Cut. Go to this link in the description to sign up. The first 500 people to click that link will also get 2 whole months for free. So give it a try and learn a new skill. Thanks for watching, everyone, and an extra special thanks to my patrons for supporting this channel. If you want to help me out, you can head over to patreon.com/justright and pitch in as little as $1 per video, because every dollar helps me make these videos better and better. Keep writing, everyone. In 1982, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner changed science fiction, launching the cyberpunk genre with a mesmerizing vision of a future run down by technology. Except, this footage isn't from Blade Runner. It's from the new Netflix series Altered Carbon, which looks more like a sequel to Blade Runner than the actual sequel to Blade Runner does. But I don't want to pick on Altered Carbon too much. It's far from the only story pointed out, in which I'll hopefully expand upon here. Flying cars, giant ads on giant skyscrapers, massive income inequality, it's all here. What I want to do is ask why cyberpunk has fixated so heavily on this aesthetic, and does it still make sense to use that aesthetic 40 years after it was initially created? And to do all that, I've got to talk about how cyberpunk came into being. There are two seminal works of cyberpunk that are credited with kicking off the genre, the aforementioned Blade Runner in 1982, and 2 years later, William Gibson's novel, Neuromancer. In an interview with Paris Review, William Gibson related how he had once ran into Ridley Scott, and the two talked about the ingredients they had used to form their respective works, and realized that they had basically been working from the same recipe. That included French comic books, which in the 1970s were publishing some of the most provocative science fiction images anywhere. And one glance at them is enough to see the influence on Blade Runner's Los Angeles or on Gibson's urban sprawl. Both works also owe a lot to Japanese urban planning, since every cyberpunk city sort of looks like downtown Tokyo. But to understand one of the most important influences on these worlds, we're going to need a primer on the history of the detective genre. In Altered Carbon, there is an AI character who takes the form of Edgar Allan Poe, a nod to the fact that Poe is credited with inventing the detective genre with his 1814 story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. The story includes a brilliant detective, a narrator who is the detective's friend, an incompetent police force, and a scene where the detective reveals the solution to the mystery through the application of logic. If you're thinking, that sounds a lot like Sherlock Holmes, well, you're right. It is the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. But in the 1920s, when American writers like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett started writing detective stories, they changed a lot of the core tropes of the genre. And in the process, they created the hard-boiled detective. Hard-boiled detective fiction relocated the genre to the mean streets of crime-infested cities. Instead of a gentleman detective with a mostly academic interest in the mystery, we got rough-around-the-edges anti-heroes who worked mostly for money but still had an inner sense of nobility. It's a type of fiction that is inextricably linked to the time period in which it was created, reflecting back at its audience the pains of the Prohibition and the Depression. Now, I've been playing clips here from film noir movies from the 40s and 50s, and that's because many of the biggest hard-boiled hits were adapted into the most important films of film noir, movies like The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon. But it's important to bring up film noir here because of the way it depicted cities. They are dark and mysterious places which feel gritty and dangerous, and where the weather is never good, all critical to the aesthetics of Blade Runner. The main character, Deckard, is a hard-boiled detective through and through, just like Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe. And Takeshi, the protagonist of Altered Carbon, hits every beat of this archetype as well. The protagonist of William Gibson's Neuromancer, a hacker named Case, is a bit different. The influence of Raymond Chandler is still there. The novel even ends on practically the same line as The Big Sleep. Like hard-boiled characters, Case is an outsider who is selfish and works for money. But unlike them, he's a criminal and doesn't have that inner sense of justice. So instead, he becomes the prototype of a character common in a lot of cyberpunk, the rebellious hacker who uses their ability to rage against the machine. But just like the Prohibition and the Depression loomed large over hard-boiled detective fiction, the 80s loomed large over Neuromancer and Blade Runner. So what was happening in the 80s again?
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Oh yeah, I think it's hard to overstate the fact that cyberpunk is a product of Ronald Reagan's America. Or at least the fear of what Ronald Reagan's America could produce. Or at least American cyberpunk fiction is. Japanese cyberpunk has a different cultural context, even if it often arrives at a similar aesthetic. But in America, the common thread that runs through cyberpunk is the anxiety over the effects of unrestrained capitalism and how technology can make all of those effects even worse. It's about how these these great forces could erode our sense of civilization, the individual, the body, and the mind. The standard cyberpunk cityscape is a fitting representation of all of this, as the lines between everything are blurred. Nothing stands out from the whole, mirroring the protagonist's struggles to maintain a sense of independence against forces greater than themselves. Today, that anxiety isn't even really theoretical anymore, but it is different than what it was in the 1980s. Here's an example. Advertisements are absolutely pervasive in cyberpunk worlds. Like giant holographic advertisements that take up the whole sides of buildings, like this one in Blade Runner. Capitalism is literally wrapping itself around the city. It is the city. And it made sense in 1980. Almost immediately, Reagan was cutting taxes and slashing regulations, basically taking the reins off of capitalism. Reagan also peeled back the laws stopping companies from targeting their advertising to children, which led to all of this.
Each sold separately.
Thanks, Reagan. But there's a bit of a contradiction implicit to the use of advertising as the aesthetic of choice in cyberpunk today, because the presence of advertising is supposed to feel oppressive, soul-crushing. But for us, having lived with cyberpunk for nearly 40 years, they're part of the appeal. They're what give the city its alluring neon glow. This shot in Altered Carbon isn't about the horror of advertising dominating the skyline, but about how cool the city looks. Placed at the end of the first episode as it is, the shot is a promise to the viewer. It's a hook, inviting us to explore the city in the rest of the series. Of course, today we're still terrified about the growing prominence of advertising, but if the worst types of ads were the neon signs on buildings, we consider it a blessing at this point. The ads we really fear today are the inescapable ones which track our behavior and collect data about us, or fake news spread on social media that is used for political purposes. And I'd love to see cyberpunk explore that side of capitalism. Another example of how things have changed? Here's a graph of the murder rate in America from 1950 until today. You'll notice that it spikes at 1980, so it made sense that the writers of that time would be concerned about the rising crime rate and create worlds where crime was everywhere. It doesn't make quite as much sense today, where violent crime has been declining for years. A cyberpunk world is, almost by definition, a world that is on the brink of collapse, but it doesn't have to be on the brink of collapse because of crime. It can be because of climate change, mass migration, terrorism, nationalism, fascism. For writers, there's really an embarrassment of riches out there when it comes to, potentially world-ending crises that are happening right now. Yeah. And in fairness, there are pieces of fiction out there that are tackling these topics, but all of these things are the reasons a show like Altered Carbon feels outdated to me. In its defense, it has an intriguing sci-fi premise which it uses as an income inequality allegory, but the show is suffocated by an over-reliance on cyberpunk tropes that are rooted in a time that is no longer our own. This is why Blade Runner 2049 feels fresher on this point. Even though it's sort of obligated to recreate the dystopian version of Los Angeles from the original movie, the other settings in the film feel inspired by our present. The Dust Bowl version of Vegas is inspired by Sydney, Australia during a sandstorm. Another part of the story takes place in a junkyard, and both feel like they exist concerns about climate change. Topicality is also one of the reasons I think Mr. Robot is so brilliant. Oh yeah, Mr. Robot, it's Cyberpunk 2. But how can it be cyberpunk? There aren't even punks with leather jackets and purple hair in it. And I guess that's really what I've been trying to say here. Genre isn't just about appearances, it's about the substance of the story and what drives the conflict. While it doesn't look like cyberpunk, you've still got the giant multinational corporation as the main enemy, a group of hackers rebelling against the established order, and themes of isolation and mental health. Like so much of cyberpunk, the story focuses on how technology is pushing us apart. And while there isn't any science fictional technology in the story, at least not yet, it does explore the trope of mind invasion that occupies so much of cyberpunk fiction. Much of the show is about Elliot's battles to gain control over his own mind. And of course, as a hacker, Elliot Alderson is another descendant of Case from Neuromancer. But while cyberpunk traditionally takes place at some time in the future, Mr. Robot takes place in our present. Instead of cribbing from the visual language of film noir, it's developed its own style of cinematography to emphasize the isolation the characters feel, often tucking characters into the corners of the frame. and I think the show may even surpass the goals of the cyberpunk that has come before it. Mr. Robot is genuinely revolutionary, with its characters focused on actually changing the established capitalist order. Most cyberpunk operates as a critique of certain power structures, but they rarely offer a solution. Case in Neuromancer, for instance, never challenges the system that is controlling him. So Mr. Robot is revolutionizing both the arena that cyberpunk can take place in and taking many of the genre's core ideas further than they've ever been taken before. Towards the end of the most recent season, the world has started to look a lot more like a traditional cyberpunk universe, with all of its political posters everywhere and government forces driving through the streets. It's almost like a cyberpunk origin story. And so by setting the story in the present, Mr. Robot's mere existence is chilling, as it suggests that the dystopian world we fear may already be right around the corner. Cyberpunk is a truly global genre. It has global concerns and global influences, ranging from American hard-boiled detective fiction to French adult comic books to Japanese, well, everything. The possibilities for fresh takes on the genre are endless, so long as new writers are willing to shake up the ingredients they use to construct their fictional settings. Cyberpunk is always warning us about the negative side effects of technology, but one of the things the internet is pretty great at is helping you learn new skills. And one of the
All right, class, settle down. Settle down. That's crazy. All right? Take it outside afterward. All right, so we don't have, for some reason, Maria, Massimo. We do have Tim. We do have Garrison. We don't have Denise. We have Derek. So what is cyberpunk? And why do we care? The film Blade Runner came out in, the advanced screenings were the first weekend of May of 1982. Meaning that like in mainstream popular culture, cyberpunk as an aesthetic and as a genre has been around for 40 years. Longer than most people have been alive. Yet it still seems oddly fresh. Why? Well, yeah, that is true. I mean, the capitalism has been sucking our souls since the early Reagan years, and probably longer than that. But the apocalypse is cool. Like, the Book of Revelations was probably written in about 300 CE, about 300 AD. And it is about the apocalypse. And it is still to this day one of the most popular books of the Bible because the apocalypse is awesome. And it's terrible, but that's what makes it awesome, right? Cyberpunk is halfway to apocalypse. But what is causing this apocalypse? What? Right, this weird blend of technology and capitalism. And for better or worse, those two things are inextricably linked together. I don't know if you could rightly turn around and call this class Introduction to Capitalism, but as soon as you're using technology, you are trying to take abstract ideas like science and apply them and apply them inside of both like government and marketplace structures. So it's really hard to deploy technology without some form of either government control or capitalism. It's going to happen. By the way, you can have technology with virtually zero capitalism. I saw artifacts of this brilliantly in what was once called East Berlin. There is a museum of computing, computing from the Soviet bloc, where they did manage to have pretty much same technology we have with very little capitalism. There was always black market and some sort of state capitalism, but it can exist. So, cyberpunk is about a world that is halfway to catastrophe because of this weird blend of technology, market forces, capitalism, that sort of thing. But cyberpunk is also this cool aesthetic. And where did that aesthetic come from? What's the basic aesthetic of technology? And what's an example? They're gleaming right at you, these polished gray boxes. That's an aesthetic of technology. Aesthetics come from stories plus technology, sort of mixed together. We've talked a lot about how stories are one of the best ways you can use to persuade people. As we were pulling apart those TED Talks, we noticed that over and over again, people were using stories as a means of connection and persuading. You put that together with technology and you wind up with aesthetics. And here's the really interesting thing about putting stories and technology together to get aesthetics. Aesthetics drive politics, not the other way around. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we oftentimes think that like you choose your politics and that's what gives you your aesthetics. If you want to live like I do up in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and hang out with people that wear flannel and have drive Subarus, that you've made the political choice first and then that influences your aesthetics. When in fact, almost the exact opposite is true. It's the aesthetics that you choose that tend to affect your politics. Therefore, understanding how stories and technology work allows you to control the aesthetics and to influence the way politics happens. Isn't that crazy? This is such a weird idea, but borne out to be true again and again and again. It's why pop culture matters. It's why probably the biggest cultural force that has hit the US in the last 30 years or so has been Japanese culture. Because it is a culture that mixes stories and technologies to create a particular aesthetic. All right. To meet a particular aesthetic, and then that aesthetic starts to have an influence on politics. A lot of countries are not happy about all of the Hollywood blockbusters that wind up dominating the movie theaters in their country. Every summer, particularly in the late summer, when the early season blockbusters from the United States wind up completely overwhelming theaters, whether that's in Argentina or in Australia or Austria, let's choose countries with letters that start with names that start with A. Because the aesthetics of Hollywood films drive the politics of those cultures. And then, of course, the politics that those aesthetics drive influence the government and the industry of that area, which then wind up influencing the technology and then brings us right back to the beginning. So it winds up being this cycle of sort of social innovation and influence. The thing is, as college students, you are unlikely to be able to change it here at the government industry level or at the political level. I'm not saying you shouldn't be politically engaged. My God, you should be as politically engaged as you possibly can be. But that's a place where you can work with other people. The point of this class, with your podcasts, videos, whatever you're doing, is you're trying to leverage the technology and the technology skills that we're working on in order to change the aesthetics. So, and for those of you who are just driving, we've just finished watching about a 12-minute video on cyberpunk. And how cyberpunk is a very particular aesthetic, and that if you put stories and technology together, you get an aesthetic. And the aesthetic that you get winds up influencing the politics you have. So, what are some other examples of popular aesthetics that you've come across? And then let's see if we can reverse engineer back to the stories and technology that come from them.
This is not current, but back during the 20th century, when Japan opened up and then like Japanese made start going on, most artists were influenced by Japanese men.
Oh, Japanese! Oh my God, I completely Japanese. So, in a precursor of like our current cultural fascination with Japanese and Asian culture in the early 21st century, in the late 19th century, Japan, being literally insular, was cut off from most of the world and was reopened in the 1880s. Largely, again, due to the technology. One of the reasons why Japan was so cut off, it was just difficult to get there quickly. But by putting steam power into clipper ships, suddenly you could get back and forth between Port Arthur and Tokyo Harbor in only about 4 days. Port Arthur is now called Dalian. It is in Lushan. It's on the peninsula kind of near Beijing. But it wasn't the Chinese people that were going back and forth to Japan. It was the British and the Russians. So they wound up opening up Japanese culture and bringing it with them back to London, back to San Francisco, and it had a huge impact, particularly a type of print design and printmaking called ukiyo-e, or floating eye, which is a sort of very flat stylistic type of design that wound up having an impact on the Art Nouveau style in the 19-teens and 1920s. So that is an example of an aesthetic that came together from stories and technology that had a really big impact right up to the First World War. That's a cool one. I completely forgot. I love Japanese May. The next time you guys find yourself down at the Renwick or Sackler galleries, and I keep forgetting that everyone isn't like me, like some sort of like total nerd who goes to art museums on the weekends. But at the Renwick and Sackler, they have a really good collection of both the Japanese art and the big impact it had at the end of the pre-Raphaelite movement, and how this like really, really changed the way people saw and looked, and that as Maria was saying, that sort of flattened side of Japanese printmaking really influenced Impressionism. That is a cool aesthetic. Okay, what's another aesthetic? Give me like a random aesthetic. You're smiling. You got to have something. I'll wait. You know what I'll do is I'll wait until you have more food in your mouth next time, and I will ask you a more complicated question. So give me an example of an aesthetic.
I have two ideas. Well, one that's more serious is like with like I think it was Andy Warhol and his like soup cans aesthetic and all that stuff.
So yeah,
They stole that from comics.
So op art and pop art.
Like Wittgenstein.
Yeah. Okay. Say op. So op art and pop art that sound really similar. One is just art that is just optical, that has almost no referent, almost no actual thing. It's just there to look kind of cool. And then pop art was like what Roy Lichtenstein was doing, and Andy Warhol. And that is, you would take something that was commercial and turn it into sort of fine or high art. Yeah, of course. His most famous one of these are his Campbell soup cans. But he did this with portraits of celebrities, with like, half-used tubes of toothpaste. This is, again, stories plus technology. One of the things, so Andy Warhol is a really, really interesting, we could say he's like a technologist as much as he is an artist. He used the silk screening process, which at the time was this really high-tech way of very quickly replicating images in ink, whether that was onto t-shirts or posters or large advertisements. he used that technology to tell a story about how banal and flat, but at the same time, how very sort of fun and engaging commercial culture was. Andy Warhol is an early example of what we now kind of call postmodernism. He is in some ways very much a modernist, but he's already getting to the point where like anything can mean anything if you rearrange the signifiers enough. But he continued to tell stories with it. And the stories he told were usually about celebrities. Like virtually everything that we do now with like Instagram, a lot of it's based on Warhol's ideas. So again, he takes stories plus technologies and he creates this aesthetic. And this aesthetic blows up absolutely. It influences. He wasn't the only one, but he was sort of at like the vanguard of that. And what's interesting about Andy Warhol is he connects the period of the late 1960s countercultural movement with the early 1980s countercultural movement. Andy Warhol is as comfortable with hippies as he is with Ronald Reagan. It's really weird because he knew how to make a buck. And what he does is he has a big influence on politics. In some ways, he simultaneously was part of the reaction against the countercultural movement, but he also amplified it too. So Andy Warhol wound up doing a lot to create a political movement of sort of postmodernism. And for better or worse, our current like celebrity-driven, post-truthy political circumstance, certainly during the Trump administration, came out of those politics. And really had an influence on the government and industry. Which of course itself has an influence on the technology, which is social media, which leads right back here into the stories and technology. So yeah, we can draw a pretty clear line between Warhol's like visual aesthetic and the social media technology that we have now, and for better or worse, our politics. Okay, one other aesthetic. Okay, so Art Deco. Art Deco is weird, but cool. Let me see how I can.
New York?
Art Deco is largely, but not always, an architectural aesthetic. Shows up in other places too. Art Deco is about as far as we could push modernism. And the sort of, in fact, the rounded edges on this come out of Art Deco. The product designers at Apple took some cues from it. It's as far as modernism could sort of go. The stories behind Art Deco are usually about motion and change. Everything looks like a locomotive engine. Put together, we have this aesthetic of buildings that look like they're in motion. The politics that come out of Art Deco are effectively close to sort of FDR's New Deal. The idea that like the world is getting, it's progressivism. Like the world is getting better and faster and cooler. And in the hands of the right people, politics, the industry, and government will make the world a better place. And the technologies that came out of it really are communication technologies, where we started valuing things like phones, and then this fantastic machine that was called the telex. There was an early proto-internet of these telex machines linked onto a network. It's how the newswire services would send information back and forth. That technology came directly out of the aesthetic of Art Deco. That one was a bit more of a stretch, but it still kind of works. Right, the reason why we're having this discussion at all is that it brings us to sort of the last two chapters from Program or Be Programmed. One of them here is about scale. That in some ways, this idea that stories plus technology lead to aesthetics, which tends to influence politics, which influences governments and industry, which in turn influences the technology. This means there are two places where you, as students, as like people who want to make a change, have like an inflection point where you can start to change the world. And that is learning the technology, that's the program or be programmed, and then telling compelling stories. And that they have to go together in order to make a cool aesthetic. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't borrow an aesthetic. Heck, Warhol certainly did. But combining your stories together and the current technological system we live in, the sort of ubiquitous computing culture, is one where again, biased toward abstraction, bringing everything up to a universal level. People, ideas, everything that don't function on that level. If your ideas don't scale, they'll largely be ignored. It's important to remember, though, because if you do, you'll miss things. So the idea is that preserve particular activities and localization is the idea. And lastly, that's chapter 5. And lastly, is to have a purpose. Because what this is about is the fact that all of our technology is programmed by larger cultural ideas. And it's biased toward the people that know how to write the code. So if you remember from his chapter 1, he said that for the longest time we lived in completely oral cultures. The people that told the best stories, who could manipulate the narrative code, were the people. Then we started writing things down, and it wasn't necessarily the best storytellers. It was the people that could do the best writing. You recall from the video that we watched, was it a week ago? The librarian from Sumer wound up becoming very powerful because she knew how to write. She could pick and choose the stories of which Sumerian gods she wanted to pass on and which one she didn't. That was power. And that completely reshaped the society. It wasn't until about between 13 and 1500 when we could start to mass produce written texts. And one particular technology completely changed the world between 13 and 1500 because it allowed us to mass produce texts. What technology was that? Right, we have those two old printing presses on the other side of that wall. It absolutely changed the balance of power because now it wasn't so much the people who could do the writing, but it was the people who could mass produce the texts. That remained roughly the way things were until sort of the mid-20th century when we wound up with two things. One, the ability to mass produce moving images, photography and videography, put together with, of course, a global electronic communication system that we largely call the Internet and World Wide Web, which is moving us to the point where it isn't necessarily people that can write or even mass produce the text, but the people who program the technology in which those things move. Otherwise, we're at the mercy of the programming, or worse yet, the people who pay them. Or worse even yet, the technology itself. And that's where that cyberpunk aesthetic comes from. If you're wondering why in God's name we watch this long video about cyberpunk, that was exactly it. So, over the weekend, go on to, it should have come around to you in the announcement. Look around in the announcement. Let me see if there's anything else that's in that announcement. All right, we're going to do some video stuff today. Around in the announcement. It's kind of one of the crux of like the big picture idea of this class. Now, at the same time, there's the much more sort of specific technical little picture part of this class that we did the demonstration last. Oh, one other thing. If you log into this class, where did I put it? I put the link in here somewhere. I'll find it in a second. To the live stream, because I'm going to show you how to both live stream and record something live from your computer. particularly for those of you that are going to be turning a PowerPoint presentation into a video. And that's what we're going to go over today. Remember, the draft of your tech project doesn't have to be complete, but you should upload something, is due at the end of this week under the Common Assessment Area, and I will walk you through that at the end of the class. There is a link that will take you directly there. But more on that in a second. Any other questions before I go on into showing you how to use a piece of software called OBS to record your screens? All right. A digression, first and foremost, on video. Most of you are just going to be creating video, from your webcam. And I will send around a link to a video, I think I did, on simply how to look better on a webcam. In the meantime, I want to give you a couple tips on, on how to get compelling moving image media, whether you're shooting on your phone or with a camera, is to keep editing in mind when you shoot. Don't try to cover everything by moving the camera. Start and stop your camera as often as possible. Figure out think before you even start shooting anything, how long the final version is going to be, what are the 3 to 4 main points people will remember, and why are you making a video in the first place? Is this something that would work better as an infographic or as a podcast? Because, and I will say this again and again, the more intentional something is, the more professional it will look. 1, use a microphone, use a tripod, and use a lighting triangle. Microphones are really easy. Next, use the rule of thirds. Figure out whether you're going to get a close-up or whether you're going to put people's hands in your shot, and keep the audio as immediate as possible. Lastly, prepare questions, control time, and establish rapport. Microphones are really easy. There is a link from the page of this class to getting a $5 USB microphone that you can simply clip to yourself or whoever you're interviewing. Plug it into your camera or into your phone. Or better yet, get a stabilizer for your phone altogether. And think about lighting in terms of triangles. Everything you've seen on television, even stuff that looks really ad hoc, has 3 lighting sources. A key light, a fill light, and a backlight. Oftentimes they're set up exactly like this. The key light providing about 80% of the illumination, this fill light providing around 50 to 60%, and this backlight only about 10 to 15%. You don't have access to Hollywood lighting, but you do have access to the sun, use that as your key light, a piece of foam core, or even just like one of those big sheets of white paper in the back of the room. And a tablet computer or the screen of a laptop. You just pull the brightness to 100 and set it just off the side, and you can a lot of times create a backlight with it. The rule of thirds is really simple, so much so that most phones now have it built right into the camera. Whether you're doing a full shot, head and shoulders, a 2-shot, or just a landscape. Use that rule of thirds to control the audience's attention. Most of the video that you're creating is going to be watched on someone's phone. So keep it as immediate as possible. When you're doing a close-up, figure out whether you want to chop off the top of someone's head or not, and figure out if you want to have their hands in or not before you start shooting. The last thing you want to do is to have someone's hand, like this one right here, where it's stuck, not quite off the bottom of the screen. In other words, better to cut off the top of the head so we can see the hands. A lot of people, and it's a pretty cultural thing too, talk a lot with their hands or not. The US, most Americans don't talk a whole lot with their hands, but other parts of the world they do, where the hands become as important as the face. The reason why I brought this up was, I think back in Tuesday's class, Denisa had asked, like, how am I going to ask my my interview subject these questions? And what I said to her is, think of yourself as a story steward. that you need to convince whoever you're interviewing that you're on their side and you're helping to spread their message. And tell them ahead of time that like whatever you're doing, they're only going to remember 3 to 4 main points. So help them communicate those 3 to 4 main points by the questions that you ask them. Make sure there's an emotional connection to the ideas. And create a connection between the person you're interviewing and the audience that you're targeting. Avoid unnecessary zooms and pans. If you can, lock down a camera. The nice thing about webcams is they don't move much. Frame shots for small screens. Again, webcams tend to do this already because you tend to sit pretty close to the computer. Keep your backgrounds as simple as possible without it just being like a big void. Use that lighting triangle and get good sound.
Microphones I could borrow from the school?
None whatsoever. The school, and I now tell everyone the school has 0 equipment that we loan out. Yeah, absolutely none. In fact, most colleges that do not have a film program no longer loan out equipment to students. You can borrow some recording devices from the library, but they're not very good microphones. Long gone are the days of high schools and colleges stocking cameras, microphones, and lights for students. And the main reason for this is actually really good. The cost of a camera or the cost of a microphone has come down so far that it almost doesn't make any sense. And the 4K camera in your mobile phone that you spent $1,000 on, you spent $1,000 if you got yourself a new iPhone in the past year and a half. You just didn't spend it all at once. You're paying them $17 a month for the next, year and a half. $1,000. No, for the next 3.5 years, right? The payment plans. This is another thing. Like from people outside the U.S. are always stunned at how predatory our mobile phone process, buying of a mobile phone is. It's crazy. No, sadly, and I wish we have some lighting equipment because that's one of the few things that's still like fussy and technical. But unfortunately, we don't. I really suggest going out and go on to Amazon and just buy a $5.
I just completely forgot. But then it'll be tomorrow, so I'll figure out. I can look on and see if there's like stores, like mics.
Yeah, there used to be a really good store right downtown called Pen Camera, where you could just go in. Sometimes you can find them. There's the Best Buy at Columbia Heights is not bad.
Oh yeah.
That's not bad. There's a Best Buy at Columbia Heights. There's a Best Buy at Tenleytown. They're not bad. And a lot of times you can check their inventory on the website before you go. Save yourself the trip. The other thing I learned is as we've been able to check the inventory on the website, whether it's at Best Buy or Walmart, don't ever call. I have this one friend. It's by the way, that's like where you can tell that is the baby boomer Gen X divide. Like whether if someone who was born in the early 70s, you're not sure, like are they like more boomer or more Gen Xer? If they still call a store to find out if something is in stock, they are a boomer. And I have a friend, my God, and he was born in 1970, I think. And he will call a store and he will wait on the phone for 15 minutes until they find someone. Yeah, it's like, no, they don't, we don't have it. I don't know. Check the website is what they'll say, right? Check the website, and if they have a little USB, and go onto our Blackboard site, and it's like they're so cheap. And if you get them with about 6 feet of cable, you can easily plug it into your phone or into your laptop, and have someone sitting 4 or 5 feet away from you. You'll get great audio. Because, and this is where we'll end this little mini lecture, the more intentional something is, the more professional it looks. It really does. Here endeth the lesson. Okay. Let's do some... This is moving right there. And there you are. Let's move you in. Okay, so from the that looked terrible from that angle. Okay, so from the link I sent around both last week and in Tuesday's email, you can download this piece of software. This software has really, really changed the sort of live news and live video production industry. It uses something called Network Digital Interface and basically video over IP. It's a free piece of software that's been developed over about 15 to 20 years by a bunch of really nerdy computer programmers, again, who wanted to program rather than be programmed. Instead of waiting around for a large corporation to make a proprietary version, they made an open source version of this. It's called OBS. In fact, they just put out a major update this morning. That's what I was downloading. This is in, you can put this in, so a lot of video bloggers use this. I'll put this in singular mode, where you can simply set up your webcam. Actually, I'll do that right now. Webcam, full screen. Where you can simply set up your webcam and do, again, hopefully you light yourself a little better than I am here in this classroom. You can simply set this up and bring in your graphics, and you can do what's, I don't know, your unboxing video, your makeup tutorial, you name it. And kids these days, right? Yeah. Unboxing their makeup tutorials. Right now, my kids are watching video bloggers talking about how they make peep dioramas, because, coming up to Easter. So you can use this setup. What this allows you to do is, let's go into settings. Okay, here in our settings, we have stream. I am streaming this out to YouTube on this server. In fact, while we are nope, gotta turn down that audio. If you go to YouTube right now, you'll find the streaming out to YouTube. Because I set my streaming key into this. So we're streaming out to YouTube right now, but you don't have to. The important thing here is our output. Our video bitrate, our audio bitrate, the recording path. I'm going to put this in the movies folder on my computer. I'm going to generate a file name without space. And my recording format I can change between the open source MKV and the proprietary MP4. Over here to video. Actually, I don't need that. So I can set up my video recording so I can record onto this computer. So right now, I'm streaming out like a live blogger to YouTube. This comes up when I start streaming, and it stops when I stop streaming, which is great. And oh, right, and there's a 7-second delay, so it's totally weird. Right, stop looking at it. It's going to drive me crazy. So the more important thing here for us as people that are trying to take sort of more control over this medium is to go here into studio mode. I'm going to take black. So now, to that live stream or to the record, I'm starting in black. So here, I can start to program my video stream. In other words, I'm not just turning on a camera and live streaming, I'm thinking ahead, and I'm going to use exactly the same design, the exact same program that that's in the outline that you guys are working on. To do this, I'm going to start with black. I'm going to bring myself up full screen. I'm going to give myself a lower third. Then I'm going to start going through my my presentation. In order to do this, what I've done is I have made a presentation in Google Slides. There it is, in presenter mode. And then I have brought it up in a second window in presenter mode. And then here in Actually, I'm going to go back to so here I have set up a scene where I have the window capture, which is set from my presenter mode of Google Slides. I have my webcam brought in. Hey, look, there I am. I can bring in other webcams if I've got them set up. I can actually have two if I wanted to do like a live interview, I can set up two webcams and tab between the two of them. And And right now I just have a black background, but I can easily put in an animated background if I want to. But generally I don't, because I want to keep things simple. So I have me full screen, I have me with a lower third, I have me in a box, I have me and that together, and then I have that full screen. So what I do...
Are those already preset?
Yeah, so each of them I made, you'll notice here, there's the window of the presentation, there's the webcam, and I have another webcam. And I'll put this file up on our Blackboard, so if you download it, you'll already get this. It can pop right in. It's one of the nice things. You may have to do a little bit of work, but for the most part, because it's all open source and interoperable, you can literally copy and paste it from computer to computer. It might you might have to do a little bit, make sure the resolution is the same on your computer, but all in all, it's pretty easy to do. So when I go here into studio mode, I'm going to start on black here. And then I'm going to start recording. And you can't see it, but down here it says recording. We're 5 seconds into this. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. Did this all wrong. I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to start on black. So whatever is on the right side of the screen is what's going to be recorded or what's streaming out to YouTube. Whatever is on the left side is the, well, preview. So I know that I'm going to want to start with the webcam full screen. So now that I'm set up in my preview, I'm going to pull this down a little bit so you can see to the bottom of the screen. So you can see right now, I am still streaming out to YouTube. I have been for about an hour and a half. And then I'm going to start recording. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to hit start recording. And I'm about 5 seconds in. And then I'm going to hit transition, and it brings me up. And then I'm going to look at the webcam. I'm going to talk like, hey, welcome to my video. Today I'm going to be talking about how to make presentations that stick. For those of you who don't already know, and I'll bring in my lower third, I'm William Hanff. I am a professor here at UDC, and I teach people how to communicate, how to use technology, and how to make presentations that stick. So let's get started. And then I'll click here. I'm going to use this one because I think it looks a little prettier. And then I'll do my transition. And that brings up both me in the little box and my presentation here. So then I simply tab through my presentation in exactly the same way that I did, say, when you did your multimedia self-introduction. And you'll see my first slide is selling your idea. Because deep down, we're always selling our ideas. And then I go into my introduction. You want to make sure that things are unexpected, emotional, and simple. And since I want to highlight this, what I might do is too many screens. Click here. Take that full screen and continue to talk about how I'm going to make things unexpected, emotional, and simple. And then how many languages do you need to know to communicate with the rest of the world? Just one, your own. And then say that's coming to the go back to me in the little corner there, and then back to me full screen, and then I've set up here. Let's say I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna bring in either something live or a piece of recorded footage. This is a live stream from Chilled Cow music. Yeah, the girl's been studying for a very long time, hasn't she? So all I did there is I found the live streaming server. I think it's either from Chilled Cow or from maybe from YouTube. I can bring that in. I can bring in another stream. I found the stream. I think it's the stream from NASA.
Throughout the day, measuring the way the future satellite will measure our quality. Meanwhile, the DC-8...
There it is. I'm continuing to record. If I want to go back, I can pick back up with my... Go ahead and jump back into my presentation. Where is that? Go back with my presentation, tab through a couple of these. And then go back to me full screen. And I say, well, it's been great talking to you and giving you my presentation. Here's where I would go back into my whole thing about you know, who the graphics are courtesy of, where did I find all my information. And then to end, I pre-select the black and hit transition. And I go to black, and then I come down here and I stop recording. And what I, yeah, question.
You get like stop recording, do a transition, start recording. You have to record all the time to record everything that you're doing.
Right, so this actually gets us into like our last discussion, and I'm hoping that on Thursday we'll be able to do a one live DJ set with the one student who's doing a live DJ set, and that's Javon. Because the weird thing about the technology we're using is that we kind of have this split between creating something live, like I just recorded, you know, 3.5 to 4 minutes of live material, and then things that are pre-recorded, like the interviews that you're doing for your podcast, and then you're editing them all together in Audacity. So we're always sort of, regardless of the technology we're using, we're stuck with this split between things that happen completely live, like a DJ set, and things that are pre-recorded, like like a podcast. So what I've done is I've made a recording of this, and now I will show you where it is. So it's here in my movies folder. This one from today. It should open up in VLC. Oh, it's going to open on this side, isn't it?
I'm going to start recording.
Oh.
And you can see it, but down here is recording. We're 5 seconds into this.
So now I have my two files, my file here of my pre-recorded video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this guy out of here. Okay, so one of the things we're trying to do is regardless of which section of the class, you know, whether it's with me or with Professor Akanabi or Professor Harris, all of these get sort of looked at in the same way. We're looking for people, for all of you students, to understand technology in sort of 4 broad categories. One is to demonstrate a variety of technological software and skills to create a product. Again, it doesn't matter whether that's a DJ set or a podcast or a video, but you should comprehensively demonstrate a variety of skills for the creation of a product. At the same time, you need to know where you need some amount of information literacy. In other words, you need to know if the sources that you're choosing are any good. That's why we did the annotated bibliography. So we went and figured out, you know, is this website worth quoting? Is this music worth using? Is this news story relevant? What PSAs should I put in my podcast? Distinguishing between common knowledge and what needs to be attributed. So the PSAs, you don't actually need to give any attribution because they self-cite themselves. Brought to you by the Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council. On the other hand, if you are going to quote something from a website, you need to if you're going to give a piece of data in your podcast from a website, you need to say this came from the, I don't know, the AARP website. So and so many people who are retired pick up a second job as an online freelancer. 3% of Americans that are retired from a full-time job pick up online freelance work. Then you need to cite the AARP website. Knowing to use at least a minimum number of sources. Then the ethical standards. Some of this, of course, comes down to knowing what music you can use because it's open, because it's Creative Commons. Or, for that matter, what we just did, software that's open source that you're allowed to use. But also, of course, ethical standards in representation and in verifiability and verisimilitude. In other words, don't make podcasts that are full of lies and half-truths. And then lastly, design. Does it look cool? I'm glad that I'm working with a whole bunch of designers and students in the art program because I know you guys are going to do cool design, right? But, and you've probably heard this over and over again, that the form follows function. We had that long discussion, right? It wasn't the Bauhaus. They were actually technically proving it.
There was an architect, his name...
Yeah, if you can remind me of who that guy was, I meant to look him up. The design supports the content and is cohesive and consistent.
Louis Sullivan.
Oh, Louis Sullivan, yeah. Okay, so... So again, as we are putting together our draft, the podcast shouldn't be any shorter than 6 minutes, and I'll let you go over 8 minutes if you need to. But we're trying to keep these so that next week and the week after we can listen to these in class and not have them take all class. They should have theme music, an introduction, 3 stories, an interview, 2 PSAs, and closing credits. If you're doing a live DJ set, the one person who's doing it is not here, but has theme music, opening, 4 needle drops, an interview, 2 PSAs, and credits. If you're doing turning a presentation into a video, you should have a little introductory piece, an on-camera open, 12 to 14 graphics, which should have 2 stories in them, conclusion, and the credits. And I don't think anyone is doing a lesson plan, game app, or so. Okay. So, you should upload your draft. Let me this. And yeah, there we go. Nope, that's not what I want. Oh. What time is it? Oh, we've got some time still. So you should have all received an email earlier today that looks something like this, with a link to Program or Be Programmed, and then this link to Blackboard. Should open up in a page like this. And also the instructions, again, for how to upload. So when you go to this page, the first thing you're going to see is a screen like this. It has about 5 or 6 sections of 5 or 6 sections from the class. Click on this one that says Hanff. It will bring up this box here. And then at the very bottom of the screen, click on Start Attempt. Let's take this full screen. Here's the embedded video on how to upload stuff to YouTube, and then I'll recap this by actually uploading some stuff to YouTube. Not to YouTube, to Blackboard. Yep. It's the wrong one. button, submit, ding. So let's actually do this. Go down here, find my name. Hold this up. It's over here. You can also go here to comment assessment. And click here. For you, it will say start attempt. For me, it says continue attempt 3. And find your attachment. As you know, I just made a file, 4.7 megs. Open it up. I'm going to call it last name draft April 7. For some reason I said 8. And hit save. And here, and then hit submit. So that is uploading a video. So back on Tuesday, we took a look at how to upload an MP3 file. This is an MK4 file. I found out that we can play these back. So we can now play back the MKV files, the OGG files, MP3s, MP4s. And I think the file size limit is about 100 megs. It seems unlikely that anyone here is going to make something that's over 100 megs. If you do, simply email me and we can find another way to upload the draft. Yes, do you have a question, Mark?
Yeah, for the PowerPoint presentation that we were using, there's no template, right? We make.
You can, yeah, no, that's totally up to you. I don't want to cramp your style. You know. Yeah. I don't want to cramp your style. Let's see.
Is there an outline for that from that PowerPoint presentation though, or is the same?
No, that's totally up to you. That's your content. Again, make sure you cite your sources. Make sure that you have at least 2 sort of stories within that. But the rest, that's up to you. That's where you get to get creative. You'll find a couple other links here for animated intros from Pixabay. All of the ones I actually think this should take you through to some of my other production files. Yeah, if you're doing a video and you're looking for some animated stuff, I like this one. This one's Brain. Look at that brain. So you'll find a whole bunch of little animated intros you can use. Most of these are from Pexels and Pixabay. They're all Creative Commons or public domain. Looking for music, there's a link out to Jamendo. This will sound familiar because we use some of these. So in the email I sent around are links to all of the assets and resources. Again, if you're making a video, make sure your webcam's functional. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm preaching to the choir here. Your MOOC or TED Talk evaluation was due 2 weeks ago, but everyone here has already turned that in. They're all graded. The class meeting on Tuesday, April 11th is going to be an open lab for you to continue to work on your final tech project. So I will be here, but you do not have to come here on Tuesday the 11th. I will be available via my during Tuesday the 11th. I'll be available at my virtual office hours on WebEx. We're going to meet back in the TV studio on Thursday the 13th for another hands-on demo. We're going to do both typewriters and vinyl, and hopefully have Javon do his live DJ set. Does anyone have any other questions? All right. We're also going to take a look at two other aesthetics. Those being, it's funny because no one had come up to them. Steampunk and Afrofuturism, and how both of them are about the intersection of technology, narrative, and aesthetics. Excellent, everyone. Have a great weekend. If you have any questions, I think my office hours today are 4:30 to 5:30. Again, click this link and you'll find me there.
Professor, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You are in the journalism department, right?
Yes. Well, it's the digital media program, journalism, film, documentary.
Do you guys have any professors that teach motion graphics, or do you guys know anybody that can?
Professor Rukman Nyangoda, I think, is who's we do a 2D animation. No.
He's not gonna do a reverse study with us. He has too many things going on.
Yeah, he has generally been doing that. Send me an email and I will put you in touch with one of the other students. That's Katya Novak. She is effectively self-taught in Adobe After Effects, and she's like, I've seen her part of her reel. She's really good.
That's the issue, that it needs to be an instructor for us to get approved by direct study at the.
Oh, okay.
Because we want, like, a group of students, we don't want to take animation too. Right now, we want to do a direct study in motion graphics.
Oh, I see.
To feel the voids for like those credits.
Uh-huh.
And learn something that we actually want to learn.
Okay. Is this for the fall semester?
Yeah, but I don't think that he has like the time to do a direct study.
Okay, take care. Hold up for just 1 second, because I think I have a good solution to your problem. Do you have any other questions, Tim?
My interviewee backed out at the last minute, and
Okay.
I don't really know them.
Okay, so don't stress, don't worry. Upload the one from the NPR contest this week, and then next week when we come together, we'll come up with something in the studio to record for you.
Okay.
For your podcast.
Okay. Like I was gonna say, if anybody here wanted to do an interview, I could probably just figure out what the layman knows about DID and then educate for the podcast. But like,
Yeah, we could do that. We could even possibly set up. Okay. Upload your existing podcast by Friday, and then in next Thursday's class, along with Javon's live DJ set, we'll record your podcast interview.
okay, thank you.
We'll make it happen.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you have a question, Denisa?
I just want to show you. I just collage these photos together.
Yeah,
and
show me what you
combine
got.
it. I thought they were, okay, so this is what they give me. It's supposed to be like a collage where you can like swipe through like a panoramic.
You spend a lot of time in Chinatown.
I I did. We did.
I actually, you know, I want to spend more time exploring Chinatown, the New York Chinatown. I don't get to.
Well, I went with my mom and her sister, so my aunt, and they wanted bags.
Did you go to that crazy mall that's underneath the bridge?
I didn't. They might have, but I didn't.
There is this just bonkers crazy Chinatown mall. It's really closer to like a flea market or a swap meet that is underneath the Williamsburg Bridge or underneath the Manhattan Bridge. It's funny. It's where like way back in like the early to mid 2000s, where the Chinatown bus would drop you off.
Have you been there before, or just?
Where is it, China?
The underground.
Yeah, hold on. Let me see if I can.
Me and my brother kind of like moved away from my mom and my aunt because they would not leave. But we spent most of our time in Soho, like with those really nice, like the designer stores.
Well, the last time I was in Manhattan, I stayed in a hotel about 3 or 4 blocks south of the Chelsea Market.
Oh yeah.
Which is
We wanted to go, but we just couldn't get everything in one.
Oh yeah, I mean that's here in DC. I saved all of Manhattan in one. Yeah, apparently I did.
It's okay.
No, what is that crazy? It's down in here. Crazy Chinatown mall. I should almost just like, maybe it's under the Williamsburg Bridge, I think. It's Trader Joe's.
Yeah, even like everywhere's gentrified up there. It's crazy. But I also wanted to tell you that I'm gonna be using this camera. This is my own personal camera.
A little mirrorless.
Yeah, but I don't even know if I don't think it's gonna be able to connect to a microphone or anything. So I'm not sure what to do. But do you think like just recording off this would be fine, or do you think that investing in a microphone probably?
Well, okay, so get as good of audio as you can. I suggest get yourself a little microphone will help you a lot.
Yeah, that's what I was assuming that.
It's called the East Broadway Mall.
East Broadway Mall.
Yeah, it's a hellhole. But if you want, like,
East Broadway Mall.
And the Pike malls, there are a whole bunch of little, like, incredibly cramped and crowded.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? A bunch of them are still shut down for COVID.
That makes sense.
But yeah, there are a whole bunch of, like down in Chinatown, like a room this size would have like 8 stores in it.
Yeah, that's crazy. It was already cramped even just on the streets and stuff like that.
Well, because like as Americans, like we think of Manhattan as crowded, and Manhattan's crowded, but it is not like
anything.
Oh man, when I think back, like
Mexico City.
I was gonna say Mexico City, and like or Cairo. Actually, in my mind, I've sort of confused the two because they were both just like on one single block, there are 70,000 people, like crushing shoulder to shoulder.
9 million people in Mexico City.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But like if you go down to one of the down to like oh god and at night too, like we are not a night culture here in the U.S.
Especially not. I feel like DC struggles that a little bit.
Oh, DC is
like it's good in certain areas, but just in general.
Yeah, well, DC is like other cities I know that like shut down at like 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I mean, still have a nightlife. But without a doubt, the weirdest one is Salt Lake City, because it still has a very big Mormon influence. They stopped serving alcohol at exactly 11 by state law. It's weird.
Wow.
Which is why
by law, that's
state law, no alcohol after 11 o'clock. But as soon as you cross the border into Nevada, there'll be a casino right there and literally a liquor store, like like as far away as that door.
Yeah.
Because Nevada and Utah could not be more different.
Yeah.
But other cities, I found Charlotte, North Carolina, like DC, was a city that's like, it's a pretty hip town, but like not a late night place. I mean, if you want late night, go to San Francisco, New York, Las Vegas.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So you know anybody?
Yeah, I have. So I am teaching the digital editing class,
Okay.
which is all based in the Adobe Creative Suite.
Okay.
And we're going to start with Adobe Premiere Pro, but then we're going to go into After Effects. And so if you want to get, because what we're basically, it's tutorials and then projects. I mean,
Okay.
duh. How many people are looking to?
Do a direct study?
Yeah,
Probably 3 people.
this is all in the studio art class.
3 or 4, yeah.
Yeah.
So we our animation. We were doing Adobe Animate
Yeah,
and learning how to do like people moving or like things bouncing.
oh,
and
like
stuff.
splines and character
Yeah, and,
animation.
like twirl and stuff, but
Yeah, well,
so we don't want to deal with her next semester. That's the honest truth.
Okay.
And we want to
who is the program coordinator for that right now?
Professor Brockman.
Oh, he's the okay.
And
So
he said that if we had a professor that wanted to teach us motion graphics, we can do a direct study.
or what I can do is, again, I'll have to talk with Professor Nyangoda and Davide Pret and Alex Howe, who's the division chair.
Okay.
But I can have you guys register in the digital editing class. And for the students that are going to do Premiere Pro, they'll do all their projects in Premiere Pro. And for you students that are going to do your projects in Adobe Animate, you can work in Adobe Animate.
Okay.
Because
the thing is that we don't care, as long as we learn motion graphics, we don't care which program we're using.
yeah.
We just want to learn how to actually do motion graphics.
Yeah, well, if you're so Adobe Animate is like character and object animation as opposed to like multi-layer composite editing, which is like After Effects is a little closer to multi-level compositing.
That's what we actually would like to learn.
Adobe After Effects as well. Yeah, so send me an email.
Okay.
Let's start this now because there'll be enough room in that. And I assume all of you guys have laptops and you're just using Adobe Creative Cloud on your computers, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes it really easy to teach.
Okay.
Because again, for the most part, it's doing the tutorials on your own and then coming in for sort of Q&A, hands-on help with anything that you can't get through the tutorial.
Right.
And then, once you get past the midterm, project-based work, doing 3 to 4 minute videos. And again, like with this class, every class I do, I want to make sure that people have things that can go in their portfolio.
Okay.
Because it's your portfolio, not your bachelor's degree, that sells you.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I can get. I'm gonna talk to my friend Lita and then let her know. And then you said that we'll do it Adobe Premiere Pro.
Yeah, it'll be like Adobe Premiere Pro, Adobe After Effects, and then we can put in some of Adobe Animate too to do.
Whichever you prefer, because the thing is that we just want to learn how to put together videos that can work in the graphic design industry.
Yeah, right.
We're not gonna with a video of we can animate a little bouncing thing. That's
Yeah. No, send me an email and let's start this up because I can make space in the class and I can set it up so that you're doing the projects you need to get good things into your demo reel.
got it.
That is, really what we should be designing the classes.
Lita?
Yeah. Try to stay dry out there. Is there someone out there? Oh.
I haven't been come to class. I've been dealing with some stuff personal life.
Let me see. What are you missing?
I did the first test, and and I finished the little.
Oh, right. Look, what's your last name?
Thomas.
Derek.
Uh,
Right. Okay. I see.
I'm going to do.
All right, you've done quiz 1. I'll grade that.
I'm going to do the other quizzes and the other stuff during this weekend.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on.
And I did the project. I just got.
Okay. So, take care, Maria. Send me that email, and we'll get that class. You have saved a draft for the MOOC or TED Talk evaluation, but you have to actually submit it before I can grade it.
No, I just look at it. It will usually say that I did something with it. If I
Yeah.
look at
Okay.
it.
So you need to turn in your annotated bibliography, the MOOC and TED Talk evaluation, and the outline is due today.
Most of that stuff won't be turned in by the
Yeah.
next time I come in here.
And then obviously the tech project is what's due at the end of the semester.
I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and obviously the outline that you put together is the outline for that tech project. So just follow the assignment, and if you follow the assignment for the outline, and then we're not going to have class on Tuesday. I'll send around I assume you've been getting the emails. I'll send around the email. We're going to be meeting back in the studio in Building 38 a week from today.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.